More political pressure to rewrite the agreement which allows UK border controls in France. A French official calls for migrants in Calais to be allowed to apply for asylum before they reach the UK. The Home Secretary will be in France for talks tomorrow. Also here tonight.
And you'll be in a world of pure imagination.
The star of Willy Wonka, the actor and comedian Gene Wilder, has died at the age of 83. Brazil's suspended president calls her potential impeachment a death penalty for democracy. As Donald Trump launches a huge advertising campaign in swing states, we hear why Ohio is so important in the US presidential election. Hello, good evening. Migrants in Calais who want asylum in the UK should be allowed to lodge their claim in France, according to the president of the region. Xavier Bertrand told the BBC that people living in the camp known as the Jungle should be able to apply for asylum before they reach this country. His comments come after two leading contenders for the French presidency in next year's election, Nicolas Sarkozy and Alain Juppé, also called for changes to the treaty, which allows UK border controls on French soil. Matthew Price has more from Calais.
Welcome to Fortress Calais, where fences and barbed wire stretch along the roads and the railways that lead to the ferries, the trains and on to Britain. Every day more are put up to stop people living here illegally crossing the channel. But there's only so much a fence can do. Calais' shantytown camp that's known as the Jungle is growing. Many here believe that part of the problem is the bilateral agreement known as Le Touquet that sees British border guards stationed in France. The president of this region says Le Touquet must change or end.
It's not possible to keep the border here without a new cooperation between the two governments. If British government don't want to open this discussion, we will tell you Touquet's agreement, that's over.
That's a threat, but he does have a solution. Migrants hoping to claim asylum in the UK should be able to do so at a hotspot in France. Could it work?
I think it's a terrible idea, partly because that's not how the asylum system works. You are supposed to apply in the country that you find yourself in. Secondly, I just think it would be a huge magnet to draw thousands more migrants to Calais who'd come to chance their arm that they might get through to the UK.
Mr. Bertrand's intervention highlights how important the issues of security, of borders, of migration have become here in France. He doesn't have the power to change the Le Touquet Accord, but the next French president will have that power. Elections are due to be held next year, and already two of the leading contenders for the post have said something needs to change. One of them, the former President Nicolas Sarkozy, spoke this weekend in Le Touquet. He said border controls should be shifted to Britain. The current French president, who recently met the Prime Minister, doesn't agree. He says the accord is in the interests of both their countries. But it doesn't feel like it on the roads leading to Calais, where smugglers block the route so migrants can stow away to Britain. Tomorrow, the Home Secretary Amber Rudd will be in Paris to meet her opposite number, and Calais will be on the agenda. Matthew Price, BBC News, Calais.
And let's talk to our political correspondent, Carol Walker. Tell us more about the British government response to this, Carol.
Well, Amber Rudd is going to be having her first meeting with her French counterpart in Paris tomorrow, and sources close to her are dismissing in some pretty strong language this whole idea that migrants still in France could claim asylum in the UK. A complete non-starter is how one source close to her described it, and said she would be making it crystal clear that she believes that migrants who are seeking refuge should claim asylum in the first safe country that they reach. This is an internationally recognised principle, and as once put it to me, We're sticking to it. Now, at the moment, there is no proposal from the French government to change these Le Touquet arrangements. But as you heard, with both the leading contenders from the right seeking changes to it, this highly contentious issue could yet be reopened, just as Britain is engaged in those even more contentious talks over Brexit.
Carol Walker, thank you. The comic actor Gene Wilder has died. He was 83. One of his best-known performances was the title role in the film Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. And he collaborated on numerous occasions with Mel Brooks, who said tonight he blessed every film we did with his magic, and he blessed me with his friendship. Our correspondent Nick Hyam looks back at Gene Wilder's life and career.
Hold your breath. Make a wish. Count to 3. Come with me, and you'll be in a world of pure imagination.
A young Gene Wilder as Roald Dahl's fantastical Willy Wonka, a character that's delighted children for over 40 years.
You have 58 seconds.
Well, and glancing...
He'd made his name in the films of Mel Brooks, way over the top yet irresistibly funny. No one could do hysteria quite like Gene Wilder.
Mr. Bialystok, I cannot function under these conditions. You make me extremely nervous.
What is that, a handkerchief?
What? Nothing, that's nothing.
If it's nothing, why can't I see?
My blanket, my blue blanket, give me my blue blanket.
The Waco Kid.
The pair went on to make a series of films together. In Blazing Saddles, he was the burnt-out Waco Kid, once the fastest gun in the West.
Today, look at that.
Steady as a rock.
Yeah, but I shoot with this hand. They'll be there when we're dancing.
Yeah.
Acting success led to a career as a writer and director as well. He was not, he said, in private life, a funny man.
When I do make jokes, they're usually not that funny. They're kind of corny. But if I go in public somewhere, the first thing people say, come on, let's have one.
After Mel Brooks, he formed a second partnership with Richard Pryor, notably as a pair of wrongly convicted prisoners.
I hereby sentence you to serve 125 years in the custody of the Commissioner of the Department of Corrections.
Wait, no. Wait, we didn't do it. There's a misunderstanding. I didn't.
Our lawyer
told us to come up.
He's joking. He means
I
we
told
didn't do
him.
it.
See,
we didn't do it.
Have you got the right case?
When his third wife died of cancer, he became a high-profile campaigner for better prevention, along with Princess Diana, and he effectively swapped film roles for television, starring in his own series.
I'm hysterical.
But he'll be remembered chiefly for those classic Wilder performances, combining his bulging eyes and wild hair with rampaging neurosis and just a touch of sentimentality.
I'm hysterical and I'm wet. I'm in pain.
Gene Wilder, who's died at the age of 83. The US Defence Secretary Ash Carter has tonight called on Turkish and Kurdish forces in northern Syria to stop fighting each other and focus on attacking militants from so-called Islamic State. Turkish troops moved across the border last week to drive out IS fighters, but since then they've concentrated their fire on Kurdish groups who are a key partner of the US. Let's talk to our Middle East correspondent Quentin Somerville in Beirut. A complicated conflict getting even more complicated, Quentin.
Absolutely, Jane. It's a question of priorities and a question of who is the biggest enemy. The Turks certainly wanted to remove the Islamic State when they crossed their border, but they also wanted to stop the Kurds, and they made that very plain from the beginning. The Kurds have been very successful at attacking the Islamic State, but they've also been very good at gaining territory. And one thing Turkey will never stand is any kind of Turkish state, any kind of Kurdish state being created on its border. It's worth bearing in mind that the conflict between the Kurds and the Turks is an old one. It predates the Syrian civil war, it predates the Islamic State, and it will probably outlast both of those. So what we're seeing right now is the fundamental contradiction, if you like, in the United States policy in Syria. Take two blood enemies, put them together and tell them to fight a third blood enemy. So right now the United States is saying, turn your guns away from each other and concentrate them on the Islamic State, and that's critical because right now the so-called Islamic State is on the back foot and it needs to be tackled from all sides.
Quentin Somerville, thank you. The suspended Brazilian president, Dilma Rousseff, has been defending her record in office at her impeachment trial. Senators are due to vote later this week on whether to remove her from power, a move she says would be a death penalty for democracy. Our correspondent Alim Makboul is in the Brazilian capital, Alim.
Yes, well, Dilma Rousseff has been under fire for hours in the Senate chamber behind me, fielding questions from those senators who are going to decide her fate. She has been defiant and she's called what's happened to her a coup.
Brazil's first female president is now fighting for her political life. At her impeachment trial, she battled against being removed from office by what she sees as elite forces grabbing back power.
The Constitution is clear. It says for an impeachment there needs to be a crime. If there's no crime, this impeachment process takes an innocent person from the government. And that is a coup, a parliamentary coup.
Earlier this year, thousands took to the streets, both for and against their president, in an illustration of just how divided Brazilian society is. It was a dramatic economic collapse that led Rousseff's opponents to seize on an opportunity to impeach her and topple her leftist government, even though no corruption has been directly linked to her.
Well, there are supporters of Dilma Rousseff outside the Senate as she speaks, but millions more around the country too who feel that she's being impeached unfairly. But the small numbers and relative lack of energy is a sign that very few have hope left that she'll survive this process.
Dilma Rousseff's been on trial before. In her youth, she was jailed for fighting against a military dictatorship. But she rose to Brazil's highest office in 2010, receiving the presidential sash from her predecessor and mentor, the hugely popular Lula da Silva. But in May, after a campaign against her, many celebrated as she was suspended and proceedings against her began. The movement to save her presidency faded away. The trial now is all a big come down after the feel-good factor of the Olympics. As some of the venues are dismantled, it seems a break for the Games helped persuade many Brazilians to move on from trying to save their president.
I think she's already out. I mean, nobody remembers her anymore. You know what I mean? They say Brazilians have short-term memory. We can't remember stuff that happens. We only remember what just happened.
But Ms. Rousseff says fighting is in her nature and she hasn't given up yet. In reality, before the week's out, she could be told she has to vacate the presidential palace. Alim Makboul, BBC News in Brasilia.
Police in Surrey, investigating reports that a boy had been abducted, have arrested a man on suspicion of perverting the course of justice. A search was launched on Thursday after a member of the public reported seeing a child being bundled into a van in Red Hill. Police now say they haven't been able to corroborate that report. Police in the Irish Republic say a family of 5 have been found dead at a house in County Cavan. The bodies of a father in his 40s, his wife and their 3 sons, aged 13, 11 and 6, were discovered at the house in Oakdean Downs. Officers say they're not looking for anyone else in connection with the deaths. The benefits of a Mediterranean diet to our health are well known, but can following it be helpful to someone who already has heart disease? New research suggests that switching to healthier foods, even after diagnosis, can reduce the risk of dying from the condition by up to a third. Dan Johnson reports.
The key ingredients for a long and healthy life. We know a diet of vegetables, fish, nuts and olive oil is a good one. But now, a claim it can even help beat heart disease.
The balance of fruit and vegetables means that there is extra vitamins and related compounds which are better for you. So it's a balance. The Mediterranean diet is genuinely, I think, more healthy.
1,200 patients who'd had heart attacks, strokes and blocked arteries were tracked over 7 years. The ones who followed a Mediterranean diet were less likely to be amongst those who died during the study. And healthier hearts are no surprise here at this Italian deli.
We use in our recipes a lot of vegetables and fruits, pasta, pizza, everything is from the ground.
The grilled fish, vegetables, and lovely meat dishes.
Cardiovascular problems account for more than a quarter of all deaths in the UK. That's more than 150,000 every year. So the hope is, by eating more like this, we may be able to prevent some of that disease and extend some of those lives. There's a claim Mediterranean cooking could be more effective than drugs like statins, widely prescribed for heart problems. The author of this study even said the NHS should prescribe vegetables before pills. Dan Johnson, BBC News.
Donald Trump is launching an advertising blitz this week. It's his biggest of the campaign so far, targeting 9 key battleground states that could decide the outcome of the presidential election. One of those states is Ohio, a bellwether with a long history of voting for the winning candidate. In the first of 2 reports from the crucial swing states, our correspondent Nick Bryant has been talking to voters in the town of Calais, Ohio.
On the banks of the Ohio River, this election could be decided. In every presidential contest for the past 50 years, Ohio has picked the winner. The Rust Belt town of Calais has precisely the sort of post-industrial landscape that's become a seedbed for the candidacy of Donald Trump. 4 steel mills have shut down in this area over the past decade. This stretch of river used to be bustling with 300 barges operating 24 hours a day. Now there are just 80. Captain Bob Harrison reckons America needs a businessman to make it great again.
I mean, that's what we need to get things going again, because politicians haven't done anything for us. We've been overregulated. You know, the trade deals have all failed, seems like. I mean, nothing's worked. So
Time for a change?
We need a change. We need to get rid of politicians. We need people who want to work, who want to do something.
Calais still proudly calls itself the all-American town, but for decades it's been in decline. Donald Trump should win here, but he has a problem.
American politics has become so polarized in recent decades that presidential elections tend to be won by the candidates who can maximize turnout amongst their own party supporters. And polls repeatedly show the Republican voters are less loyal to Donald Trump than Democrats are to Hillary Clinton.
Getting out the vote is called the ground game, a term borrowed from American football and something the Democrats are highly practiced at.
Push him off, push him off, push him off.
It's all new to Donald Trump, and what makes his turnout operation all the more difficult is that Republicans like Coach Bill Timko are refusing to campaign or even vote for him.
He doesn't have any tact. You know, if you're going to deal with world leaders, you have to have tact. You can't sit there and say it's my way or the highway. It doesn't work. He's bombastic, he's obscene, and I don't like the guy.
You just don't think he's presidential?
No, without a doubt. He has no presidential qualities.
So you actually campaigned for Mitt Romney? This is a staunchly conservative household. At the last election, Amber Thompson actively campaigned for the Republican candidate Mitt Romney. But she can't stomach Donald Trump as the party's standard-bearer. The decline in support from Republican women is one of his biggest weaknesses.
He doesn't like women who aren't supermodels. He does not like Muslims. He does not like immigrants. He does not like POWs like John McCain. These are people that I respect and care about.
Are you going to sit this election out?
No, I will be voting.
For Hillary Clinton?
I'll be voting for Hillary.
No Republican has ever become president without winning Ohio, but Donald Trump is trailing here in the polls. He'll struggle to go all the way to the White House if he can't get mainstream conservatives to support him. Nick Bryant, BBC News, on the Ohio River.
And tomorrow we'll have the second of Nick's reports. He'll be in Pennsylvania, a must-win state for Hillary Clinton. In football, the England manager Sam Allardyce has started preparations for his first World Cup qualifier against Slovakia on Sunday. He met his new squad for the first time today. It includes the uncapped West Ham midfielder Michail Antonio. And just before we go, the American singer Beyoncé dominated this year's MTV Video Awards in New York, winning 8 categories. She picked up the top award, Video of the Year, for her song Formation, which makes reference to racism, police brutality and Hurricane Katrina. The ceremony also included a comeback performance from Britney Spears, 9 years after her last appearance at the awards, and a Lifetime Achievement Award for Rihanna, who's 28. Well, that's all from all of us now on BBC One. It's time for the news wherever you are. Very good night. Bye-bye.